Hello, some glimmers of hope as we navigate COVID confusion, and that is the pulse of America tonight. Omicron fears have gripped the country, hovering over the holidays as we dealt with long lines at testing sites, thousands of canceled flights, as well as several major school districts now delaying their reopening or deciding to go full virtual. So was that reaction warranted or maybe driven by fear? A new Axios poll shows Americans are more fearful about 2022 than we were heading into 2021. 54% were more fearful compared to 44% who were hopeful. Last year, 63% were hopeful. Says a lot about where we are right now. So what's driving the fear? Is it the explosion of cases across the country? 405,000 yesterday, an increase of more than 200% compared to 2 weeks before. On Thursday, 580,000 cases. That's a record, and it's believed to be an undercount, actually, due to testing shortages, at-home testing, and reporting delays over the holidays. But Dr. Anthony Fauci says we shouldn't be looking at case numbers as the benchmark anymore. Instead, he says it's hospitalizations.
And this is particularly relevant if you're having an infection that is much, much more asymptomatic and minimally symptomatic, particularly in people who are vaccinated and boosted. The real bottom line that you want to be concerned about is, are we getting protected by the vaccines from severe disease leading to hospitalization?
So perhaps a glimmer of hope right there from the president's top medical advisor. We're getting tested a lot more, and Omicron is more contagious, so it makes sense that cases would go up. Now, here's another glimmer for you. South Africa, where we first heard of Omicron on the day after Thanksgiving. It has passed its peak of the variant. Scientists are now projecting we could hit our peak here in the U.S. as soon as the middle of this month. And finally, maybe we save the best for last, the top health official in Denmark says Omicron is bringing about the end of the pandemic. We will have our normal lives back in 2 months, she says. So does that mean we could be on the other end of this thing by spring or maybe even by Easter? That's where we began with Dr. Brett Giroir, frequent guest for us and friend of the broadcast. It's always good to see you. He was the former testing czar under President Trump. So let's start with that study out of Denmark, Doctor. Could you think Omicron be maybe the beginning of the end, possibly a couple of 3 months down the road?
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm not going to make that prediction, but there is a silver lining to Omicron. And that silver lining is that it's very contagious, but not very severe, which means that everybody's getting a good boost of their antibodies and their T cells. So what the person in Denmark was really saying is if we can get through this, and remember, we'll get through it a lot better if you're vaccinated before you get Omicron, there will be widespread natural immunity and what we call hybrid immunity, where you've had a vaccine and Omicron. So yes, this could be the beginning of the end. Now, when we say the end, I don't think that COVID is going to go away. Right. It's going to be endemic. But we can live with it if it causes a cold and not many hospitalizations. That's what we really shoot for, not the lack of any case, but the lack of hospitalizations.
What does this mean for the Delta variant, Doctor? If we're talking so much about Omicron and it's running through the population, what does it mean for Delta?
Well, if you had to choose, you would choose not to get either, but you certainly would rather get Omicron. And we have pretty good information now that if you get sick with Omicron, it greatly boosts your immunity against Delta. So Omicron will provide cross protection against Delta. So if you have had Omicron, particularly if you had vaccinated and then get Omicron, Delta should not be a threat to you, and that's really good news. Now, if you're immunosuppressed, have cancer, on special drugs, all bets are off. I'm talking about the regular population.
People are walking around with this apparently and not even knowing it, Doctor. Is that reassuring to you or not?
Oh, it really is, because, and I know, I've had literally dozens of people I know, and half of them have no symptoms whatsoever. They just tested because they were exposed. It is less severe because it's a less severe infection. And remember, if you've been vaccinated, or if you have hybrid immunity, you've gotten COVID and been vaccinated, your chances of getting ill with this are very low. They're not zero, but they are very low. So this is just all emblematic of a less severe infection in a more immune population. These are all good things.
Yeah, I'm wondering, as I sit here, having been vaxxed and boosted, talking with friends of mine who have been as well and have gotten COVID, Omicron particularly, are we better off no one wants it, but if we should get it, is that a better thing for our immunity system if we're vaxxed and boosted?
Well, you know, you're getting a little edgy here, but all of us have a date with COVID, particularly with Omicron. It's so contagious and it evades prior immunity. So if you're going to get it, and most people are going to get it, it's much better to get it after you've been vaccinated and boosted. You can't hide in your basement forever. When you come out a year from now, there's going to be something around. So there is something to be said for that. Now, look, I don't want anybody to go out looking for Omicron.
Right.
But if you do get Omicron on top of being vaccinated and boosted, you're likely to have a mild illness, and it's likely to give you very long protection against all variants in the future.
I'm a huge fan of the vaccine, Doctor. You know that. You and I have talked about it several times, but I'm wondering if we're all going to get it and the majority of us are vaccinated, then is the vaccine working with Omicron?
Well, yes, it's working with Omicron because it's only mildly protective against you getting Omicron. Even boosted people are getting it, but you're staying out of the hospital and you're staying away from getting severe illness. You're likely avoiding long COVID. These are really what the vaccines are meant to do. If I have the sniffles for 2 or 3 days, look, I'm not going to, I'm going to claim that as a victory. And I think even President Trump, he expressed it very well about, it's the people who are unvaccinated in the hospital. If you get, the Trump administration's vaccines and boosters, you're going to be protected. And I agree with that.
So clarify for us, if you would, the new CDC guidance. There's some confusion about 5 days now that you need to, I guess, quarantine. Is it 5 days after you're positive? Is it 5 days after you get symptoms? 5 days plus 5 days of masking around others? I mean, once you're positive, what do people do now?
So it's very confusing, and I really empathize with people because it's been a massive miscommunication on confusing guidelines. What the CDC is recommending is that if you are positive, that you isolate in your home away from other people for 5 days, and that after that you can go out wearing a mask for another 5 days to make sure you don't transmit it. Okay. We're all for getting out of isolation early, and I think the intent is right. The big question is, at 5 days, you could still be infectious, and I think all of us would have felt better if you put in a test there that if you want to be more careful, not necessarily required, but if you want to be more careful, take a test at 5 or 6 days. If you're negative, and that's a rapid test. If you're negative, you're really pretty much good to go. If you're positive, you're still highly infectious. You saw Dr. Fauci backtrack on the recommendations only a few days after they were given. So I don't know what's going on in the CDC's mind. I hope they clarify it this week, and I bet they will.
But you think people should get a test before they proceed after having it?
So, there's no black or white, right? If I'm going to visit my grandmother, or my mother, or, people at risk, I'm going to be very loath to be just 5 days and to go out with them, even if I'm wearing a mask. I would want a negative test, or I would want to stay in isolation for 10 days. I'm not saying you have to do that for everyone everywhere. It's all a matter of risk, right? If you're young and healthy and around vaccinated people, it's less important. If you're going to go into high-risk situations or going to go to a party or travel in groups, then it's a much better idea to get that rapid test. What Biden should be doing, instead of having 500 million just on the internet for anybody who wants them, he should be supporting people who want a test to get out of isolation by sending it to them, and also people who could benefit from the very powerful new oral drugs from Merck and Pfizer. That's where we should be. We should be strategic with those free tests, not give them out willy-nilly, first come, first serve.
You made some news this morning when you said that you agreed with Dr. Gottlieb that cloth masks don't necessarily work or aren't that efficient. Does that mean they haven't worked all along? And if not cloth, what do we need?
Thank you for asking that. Omicron is a really different beast. Cloth masks have never been perfect, but they have provided protection. And the CDC has estimated, 25 to 50% protection from spreading and getting. Omicron is very airborne. So it is a variant that is very different. So cloth masks provided reasonable protection in the past. N95 is always better. But with Omicron, cloth masks don't seem to be protective. In fact, they don't seem to be very useful at all. The typical single-layer cloth masks are the things you pull up like a bandana. So if you are concerned, and I'm not saying go out and wear a mask outdoors when you're riding your bike or, among people but if you were concerned or if you were at risk, like a person with cancer, immunosuppressed, diabetes, obese, old, and you're in a crowded situation, it is much better to wear a surgical mask, which are widely available, or an N95 mask, which are also widely available. Again, I'm not saying mandates, I'm not saying do it crazy, but if you're going to wear one, it's better to be safer with Omicron, which is a different beast.
Right. Okay, we're heading into the new year, so give us your outlook, I guess, if you would, Doctor. What are we in for? Are we looking at another booster 6 months from now? What do you think?
So it's possible, but I want to say, look, I'm very optimistic, and I was very concerned by your stats that you showed that people are more fearful. Look, we have vaccines that work, and the current vaccine works against Omicron to keep you out of the hospital. We have oral antivirals coming out. You know, this is going to be like taking Tamiflu when you get the flu. They're very highly effective at keeping you out of the hospital. We have a whole slew of new monoclonal antibodies coming on. So look, we have lots of things that could protect us. I do believe that Omicron will sweep through the population. Even though it's not as severe, we have to protect the people who are vulnerable. We have to support our healthcare workers from hospitals getting overrun. But between the vaccines and Omicron immunity, I think we're going to see a dramatic decrease in the severity of this pandemic towards the mid-year. Now, it's hard to predict. Never trust Mother Nature with an evolving virus, but I do think we're in for a good year. I'm very positive about our prospects.
Well, let's hope you're right. And it's always great to have your voice. Dr. Brett Giroir, former Assistant Secretary for Health. Thanks for the time, sir.
Thank you.
Amid the surge in coronavirus cases nationwide, many are now asking how they should respond if they're fully vaccinated and boosted. Well, one professor says the hiding in our basement behind the pile of sandbags moment has come and gone, and we decided to get him on tonight. Joining me now is that professor, Andrew Noymer, Associate Professor of Population Health and Disease Prevention at the University of California-Irvine. Professor, it's great to see you. I thought it was interesting that Dr. Giroir there actually mentioned what you have said in his interview there. We talked about, we don't have to hide in the basement anymore. What are we missing here? Because that doesn't seem to be the case. I think a lot of folks are maybe not as scared, but certainly nervous about getting this.
Well, thank you for having me on. Yes, I mean, hiding in the basement is last year. We have vaccines now, as your prior guest described, and we should treat the virus with respect and take precautions, wear masks, and I would echo that N95 is superior. Wear masks in crowded indoor settings like shopping malls, but we can get back to something closer to 2019 in terms of going out and getting vaccinated and boosted. But once we're vaccinated and boosted, we can get out and go to a restaurant and go places. We don't need to so-called lock down.
Right. But yet you're seeing now several school districts across the country who are saying, hang on a minute, we're going to go virtual for the next few days or maybe few weeks. Again, some are flying. Millions of people are flying at the same time. It just seems like we're still not sure what to do. What would your message be, Professor?
Well, for school districts, I think with masking, school districts can have in-person instruction. A lot of districts have staff shortages in terms of teachers who've tested positive. And teachers, anyone, a teacher or a student, staying home after a positive test is certainly the appropriate response. And in cases where, too many staff have tested positive, then going remote or suspending instruction for a week is certainly appropriate. But I mean, I don't think we need to go back to a whole school year of virtual instruction. The University of California-Irvine, where I teach, is going virtual for 2 weeks, but it's mostly to get everyone tested. And then the intention at this point is to go back to in the classroom.
We've been into this for almost 2 years now, Professor, and you've spent a lot of your time studying this. What do you think is the most misunderstood aspect of what we've dealt with and what we're still dealing with today moving forward?
Well, moving forward, I think the most misunderstood thing is endemicity. What does that mean? I mean, endemicity does not really mean that we go back to no COVID. Endemicity means that we have COVID every winter, the same way we have flu every winter. And it will probably be more mild, like the Omicron variant is more mild. But sometimes we have a bad flu season, and sometimes we can have a bad COVID season in years in the future. So endemicity is what we're going to get, whether we like it or not. But people have sort of used endemicity interchangeably with COVID goes away. And I mean, your viewers have to understand COVID is going to be with us for as long as anyone watching this broadcast will be alive.
All right, that's great information, and I appreciate you coming on the show tonight. Professor Andrew Noymer, Associate Professor at the University of California-Irvine. Go Anteaters. Appreciate the time. That was the tragic incident in which Los Angeles police officer William Jones shot and killed both an assault suspect in a Los Angeles department store and a teenager who happened to be there shopping. You can't see it in the video, but you can hear the faint screams coming from the dressing room, which was directly behind the suspect at the time the officer shot him. The screams are in response to the fatal shooting of a 14-year-old, Valentina Oriana Peralta. The sounds of the screams certainly chilling, and the impact of this is being felt across Los Angeles as protesters are calling for the arrest of the officer. Joining me now for more, National Sheriff's Association President Vernon Stanforth and retired LAPD Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey. Sergeant, let's start with you. This is the first chance you and I have had to talk about this case. What did you think about how it went down?
The officers, I think, did tactically what it is that they're trained to do. We know that just seconds before they fired that fatal shot, that there was also another female victim at their feet who had just been savagely beaten by this suspect who had a lock on the end of a chain. And so they're going to be judged by the information that they knew at the time that they responded. Several witnesses had reported that there was a man with a gun, that shots were being fired, and that's how the officers responded, and that's what they were reacting to. So I don't expect that they would be, nor should they be criminally charged and or fired.
Sheriff, you've seen the protests. You think he should be charged?
Well, our heart goes out to the family. We understand that this is a victimization. Once again, it is difficult for us to look at this. It's difficult for anybody to look at this. It has to be. We have a country that's off the chart right now in violent crime. And you have an officer that's responding to a violent crime, and he's going to be judged now on his response. And was his response by the policy of the agency? Was it appropriate? What did he know going into that? And that's what we're going to be weighing in the coming weeks when this is in review.
Sergeant, you touched on a couple of these things on the way in here. What they knew going into this call, what they saw when they arrived at the scene, including one woman who was bleeding on the floor, I know there. But you heard other officers tell this lead officer to slow down. What do you make of that? And also, I'm wondering tactically, you said the officer who takes the lead here has this rifle versus the other officers who appear to have handguns. What is it that you are seeing here that maybe other people aren't?
Well, I think a lot of people are interpreting the officers saying slow down as somehow being critical of the lead officer. What they're doing is communicating, which is what they were doing all along when they responded. They were yelling out to the suspect upstairs that LAPD is coming, make yourself visible. And slow down just lets the person in the front know that he may be getting ahead of the others, and they want to stay in formation. You saw the officers walking in formation. And so I don't interpret the slow down as them trying to stop him or impede his forward progression as much as I do them communicating to him, because he can't see what's going on behind him and he doesn't know the position of the other officers. And so I think that they tactically communicated well. Had the suspect been one row over, we may not be having this discussion at all. And so they were responding to what the suspect was doing.
I know, Sergeant, you've heard it out there in L.A., but why not use less lethal force at that point?
Well, there certainly was an opportunity to do that. And one of the officers that we see has, you see a green gun, that's a beanbag. Certainly less lethal could have been used. Now, why the officers didn't, why that one officer kind of pushed his way to the front with that long rifle, given that this is a department store, is something that he's going to have to answer to. But again, is it going to be criminal, or will this just be an administrative disciplinary training issue for my police chief, Mike Moore, to deal with this officer on that regard rather than something more harshly, as many are calling for?
Sheriff, you mentioned what we're dealing with here. 2021 was a rough year. There were several cities that set records for homicides, for gun deaths, for violence. We've seen all the smash and grabs. Across the board, this has become an issue. What do you think is ahead for 22, and how do we get this under control?
Well, I don't know if 2022 is going to be any different than 2021. We're in this spiral upward, and we've got to bring it down. We've got to address it. And we addressed this back in the 90s when we had the crime bill of 1993 was proposed in Congress, and we started putting money towards policing and doing it the right way, and we brought the crime down. And now we're seeing it spike back up. We've had this onslaught against our society, saying that everything's wrong, that our criminal justice system itself has been compromised, and we need to regroup. We need to get funds into the hands of local agencies to train their officers into the new dynamics of 2022 and forward.
Mm-hmm. Sergeant, we've gone through peaks like this before in the past, as you well know. How do we get out of it?
Well, I think we have to be reasonable in our requests and our responses. It can't be a knee-jerk response. And I know that there's a segment of society out there who think police officers should never use deadly force. But unfortunately, I don't believe that officers wake up in the morning wanting to do that. This was a very different and unique situation. And I don't know how the officers could have foreseen that there would be someone sheltering in place in that dressing room. As they approached that second level, it appeared to be barren of customers. Many were already outside before the officers responded. And so I think cooler heads need to prevail and let the department conduct their internal investigation and ultimately decide, based on all the information they have, what would be the best course of action.
That's retired LAPD Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey. Always good to have her, along with National Sheriff's Association President Vernon Stanford. Thank you both for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Shifting gears now to the southern border, where a smuggling attempt led to an airplane crash. Authorities are still searching for the pilot who got away and a suspected smuggler near Presidio, Texas. They say several undocumented migrants were injured in that crash. And joining me now for more on this, National Border Patrol Council President Brandon Judd. Brandon, it's good to see you. 6 people in a 4-seat plane. I just couldn't help off the bat wonder, how unusual is this to use a plane to move 5 people?
Planes are fairly unusual, and we see it every now and then, but we mostly see it when there's very few of our resources in the field. It's very difficult to get illegal aliens into a plane and get it to where it needs to be going. So it's fairly unusual. It's not something that we'd never see, but in this particular case, it is unusual.
Yeah, it seems pretty risky as well. To your point, I don't know how you get out of an airport with this cargo. I'm wondering, what were these high-value migrants who were trying to get in, or was this something that was involved or connected to a cartel? Or it just seems like such an unusual way to bring in 5 people. Normally, you would want smugglers, I'm sure, would want to get in as many as possible, which is why you see them using trucks.
So right before coming on, I was trying to confirm whether or not these were high-value criminal aliens, or whether they were just paying a very high amount of money. Now, regardless, they're going to be paying a very large sum of money to be smuggled in this manner. Right. If they were higher-value criminal aliens, that's going to be the cartels trying to get them into a specific area. But let's be clear, the reason why we don't see this very often, not only is it difficult to get them into an airport and get them in an airplane and taken off, but you also have to land at another designated location, regardless of whether it's a large airport or a small airport. So again, this is fairly unusual, so you would have to believe that this is going to be criminal aliens or higher value products. All
right, we also had this shooting that I'm sure you're familiar with, where the agents were fired on, and I'm wondering at this point, is that beyond a migration issue? Were these, do you think, warning shots from smugglers or the cartels, and how uncommon is that?
Again, it's not absolutely unusual. It is uncommon that they would actually be firing at agents from across in Mexico. But you got to look at the specific area. This area is notorious for high-level criminal activity. Yet we had a bare minimum of agents patrolling in the area. And so when you look at this, when this all comes to fruition, when we find out all of the information behind it, I believe what this is going to show is that they were smuggling across fentanyl. They were smuggling across across drugs, and they were trying to get the agent to clear the area so that they could either get the product across or get it back into Mexico. This was just one of those cases where we stumbled onto it because there were so few agents in the field in a notoriously dangerous area.
Are you noticing things slow down at all, Brandon, now that we're sort of in this seasonal, the winter? Do you think the encounters will go down?
No, in fact, if you look at Christmas Day, that's normally the one day out of the year where agents get a very huge reprieve. I worked Christmas Eve, and I can tell you that it was very, very busy, busier than I've ever seen it before in my 24-year career. So, no, we're seeing a large number of people continuing across. The cartels are continuing to generate billions of dollars of profit, and they're doing it off of our policies. This could go away like turning on a light switch if the policy is correct, but right now it just isn't.
National Border Patrol Council President Brandon Judd, thanks for your time tonight, Brandon. Take care.
Thank you, you too.
Double trouble for President Biden. Not only is Vladimir Putin on the brink of a possible war with Ukraine, he's making friends with China. And how worried do we need to be about that? That's coming up next. Tonight, there is new information from the U.S. military about an ambitious joint military operation between Russian President Vladimir Putin and China's leader Xi Jinping this summer in China. There are also reports of collaborations in aviation, as well as undersea and hypersonic weapons technology. So could these moves point to an unholy union between the two world superpowers? This, as President Biden is saying, the U.S. will act decisively should Russia invade Ukraine. Joining us now, again, Don Bramer. He was an intelligence officer and interrogator for the Navy in Iraq. Good to see you again, sir. Let's start with the headline here, which alone seems a little alarming with Russia and China getting together. What do you make of this?
Well, good evening, Joe. You know, what I think right now is China and Russia are seeing the best relations they've seen since the early 1950s. This marriage of convenience that you see is basically them both coming together against one common enemy, the West, and primarily the United States. This war games that we're looking at coming up in this current summer is very similar to what we saw this past August when in the Zapad Interaction 21, you saw Russian soldiers and Chinese soldiers working together, working their special forces, and also for the first time ever, Russian soldiers were using and learning how to use Chinese equipment.
So which part of all of this troubles you the most, Don?
Well, I think the biggest thing that troubles me is we've got to stop relying on telephone diplomacy. You know, one of the biggest reasons that both Russia and China are upset with the United States is because of these sanctions. So there has to be a better solution. You know, going on the air and putting that U.S. troops will not be considered and that we have to rely on NATO. One of the things they teach in the military is never share your tactics, your techniques, and your procedures. So saying what's not on the table should never be shared because you should always keep your adversaries guessing at what's next, and that gives you a kind of the element of surprise. I think we need to show that everything is on the table and that we're willing to sit down and have a conversation, but that there are no parameters to that discussion.
Do you think these threats, if Russia should invade Ukraine, have any teeth at all? I mean, I guess if they do invade, then the answer is clearly no. But do you think it will alter Putin's plans at all? Do you think this is inevitable?
Well, I think if I was President Zelensky, I would be very hesitant to take President Biden's phone calls. You know, this past summer, on the eve of the talks between Biden and Putin, President Biden put on hold a $100 million defense military aid package to Ukraine, and those were weapons that were crucial in helping Ukraine defend itself. They were Stingers, they were Javelins, they were anti-tank and anti-aircraft. Putting that on pause sent a really bad signal. Now, this past week, with the NDA, National Defense Authorization Act, passing, we increased, and this went through Congress, where $250 million package was increased to $300 million. But will we actually use that funds, allow these systems to get to Ukraine so that they can defend themselves as a rightful nation?
Don, before we let you go, I want to get you on the situation in Afghanistan. We found out that the suicide bomber who killed the 13 Americans at the Kabul airport had been released by the Taliban just a few days before, which is troubling to say the least. But critics were worried about just this thing happening, and now we know that it did.
Well, Al-Ghani, who was the suicide bomber, had a past. He was involved in a attack in New Delhi that was foiled in 2017. So he has a history of this. You know, when the Taliban went in and started releasing all of their allies into prisons, there was such chaos, and the chaos that we saw across the country as the Taliban took over, that they just released everyone. They released their own enemies, and what we see is now you have enemies of the United States, enemies of the West that are better armed, better funded than ever, and now that's what makes us vulnerable. And it's something that worries me, that we're not focused on the situation at hand and realizing that this is a very plausible and potential threat, that a lot of our enemies now have the funding and the resources to re-engage.
Right. Well, he was turned over to the CIA, which sent him to Afghanistan. That's how he ended up there. But as we know now, to your point, he was released not only with thousands of Taliban members, but as you mentioned, Taliban enemies as well. Don, thanks for your time. It's always good to see you. Appreciate it. On Balance with Leland Vittert starts at the top of the hour, and he joins us on set now. What do you have?
America's most popular television show. It is not the Donlon Report. No. It is not On Balance. It is Yellowstone. Do you watch it?
Yeah. We've talked about this. I have to get whatever it's on because I don't have that streaming service.
You should. And we were talking earlier that if you don't watch it, it says more about you than it does about the show.
Oh, what does it say about me? I'm just behind the times?
Yeah, but who would not want to live right out here? And Yellowstone went from being this very cult show in small markets around America to one of the most watched shows in history on cable, one of the most watched shows of the year, if not the most watched show. And talking a little bit about why and what the fact that no one's talking about this in the Hollywood media says about Hollywood.
Well, all I know is there aren't many people who look better in a cowboy hat than Kevin Costner. He wears that thing well.
He does. What guy does not want to be Kevin Costner in this video?
All right, Leland, we'll see you at the top of the hour. Thanks very much. Talk about being in the right place at the right time. A medical student takes in a hockey game and saves the life of one of the staffers on the other team. This is a great story, and it's our American Snapshot next.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, it's so nice to meet you. Are you okay with shaking hands?
Yes,
Thank you so much for reaching out.
Well,
oh my
thank
gosh. I was so shocked
Well,
when I heard about everything. Oh my goodness.
Well, yeah, you'll know why they hugged here in a second. That's med student and NHL fan Nadia Popovici and Brian Red Hamilton. He's the assistant equipment manager for the Vancouver Canucks. And the two connected after Popovici basically saved Red's life. Nadia was in the stands and noticed a mole on the back of Hamilton's neck as he was on the bench. So she wrote him a note on her phone. The mole on your back of your neck is possibly cancerous. Please go see a doctor. Well, he did. Turned out he had malignant melanoma. Now he's cancer-free. What a great story. On Balance is next. Thank you for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.